Hello, welcome to another Matt Swaps Models video. Today we're going to be having a look at this diorama that's a work in progress, particularly the basing and some of the techniques that I've used on this and some other models that I'll also be showing you. Hopefully it will give you some ideas to use for your own bases, as well as the materials that you'll need to achieve this look and anything else that you wanted to do. So the Krootox Rampagers are absolutely fantastic model. We've got brilliant movement in them. Got absolutely fantastic natural leathers and weaponry. The Kroot in general have this and absolutely adore these models. I knew I wanted something really specific for them. And it took me probably around a year and a half of having the models sat on my shelf to find the exact piece of terrain that was going to work for this as I had it planned in my head. If we have a quick look at this shot from Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. So the dynamically posed Krootox models riding up and over a hill is exactly what I was looking for, like the wargs in the video we saw. Okay, so let's kick off with where did this rock come from. Now, I was very lucky actually. I picked this up from a charity shop. It's a reptile house made by Exoterra. Now, I've started to show some on the side here, but these are readily available. This only cost me £3 from a charity shop, which is an absolute bargain. It had the exact shape that I wanted, as we talked about, with the low back and the high front to be able to give that kind of a peering over the hill look. It was also already approximately the right colour for what I wanted to do, which is kind of like a dry, dusty kind of savannah, I suppose, that the Kroot would be based in. Now, this isn't always available to you. You could build this with something like cork, or you could build it out of polystyrene. From my point of view, I kind of have different projects on the go and keep an eye out for the things that I need. So adding the 4 magnets to my Exoterra rock was relatively straightforward. They're 7mm by 2mm round magnets. So I've got them here so that we can have a quick look at those. Okay, just like this. So it's a relatively sizable magnet, makes it relatively easy to glue onto your models. So all I needed was a 7mm drill bit, and I just drilled some holes, as you can see in this little video, me doing it. That resulted in little bits that I could push. I sunk the magnet slightly lower than the level that I wanted, so they're underneath the rock as it were, and this allows me to have slight protruding magnets on my models. You can see that it hangs out slightly below. And it allows the model to sit a little bit more nicely on the surface without me having to drill a hole deep enough for the magnet into the foot of my models, which isn't always possible. You can see there I don't have the height in the rock to be able to do it. You could use smaller magnets, but I wanted it to have a decent amount of hold, so 7 by 2mm magnets was kind of the size to go for. Now, one of the main questions behind this is why magnetize all the models and make it this way? If I permanently attach them to the diorama, it means that then I can't play with them at all. If I put them on bases, it means they're never going to look as good on the diorama. So I chose a mixture of the two. I'll show you how I attach the magnets in a second, but the advantage of this is obviously I can just take the model off, I can get his base, click it on the base, and then this is ready for tabletop gameplay. Some of the bases, the holes are drilled for them. Some of them, the magnets are just attached straight on the bottom. So we can just take off the model, put him on his base, and then he's ready to go as a tabletop model. Another huge advantage of magnetizing the diorama base is obviously, having spent all this time working on it, it means that I don't have to limit myself to just one set of models. I can actually swap out something else that I'm working on at the moment. The other alternative is to make it so that the bases are invisible. For this model that goes in the cave entrance on my diorama, I've actually attached a piece of cork to his base so that he's playable as he is, but then if I to put him onto the base and push him into place, then once it's painted, the base will completely disappear and achieve the same as the magnets. So the next thing that I want to talk about is just how the basing was done. So this is just a piece of furniture, a bit of MDF that was approximately the right size. I picked these up from B&Q. They have offcuts that you can donate some money to charity and take away. And that just gives me something nice to work from. On top of that, you can see it here where I haven't quite finished it off. There's a little layer of cork. Now, I use a lot of cork tiles. The cork tiles are this thickness. Let's just grab a piece that I've got over here. Okay, these will be linked in the description. Now, I use these. You can crumble them up for little rocks, you can stack them up, you can carve away at them. They're used relatively simply on this base here. You can see them again on the base of this model. Alright, it needs to be cleaned up so it looks a little bit less flat on the top of it. Obviously that's still a work in progress. And you can see on a finished model here, where I've stacked them up a little bit more, you can see I've got a little bit of overhang. Still got some flat sections here that I'd probably have taken away if I'd had a little bit more time. You can even mount them at an angle if you want to. Alright, so you can do quite a bit with the cork boards. Absolutely worth having some of them around. I'll put a link to these ones in the description so that you can maybe pick some up. They also turn up occasionally in random places, maybe from a skip or something like that, because they are used for various things. So one of the things that you can see happening here is actually using filler to kind of cover up the Exoterra labelling, but all bits and pieces. Now, this is something that I use quite regularly. I just use cheap all-purpose filler that's available anywhere. I won't link this in the description. I'm sure you'll be able to find some in whatever local supermarket or DIY store that you have. Now, it dries nicely, it can be sanded, it paints nicely, it takes paint really well. You can get some nice interesting shapes. It doesn't have quite the same moldability as something like Milliput, which will also get used for things like little rocks here and here. But actually, it does allow you, once it's dried a little bit, to be able to model something quite nice for it. And I've got a model to show you how done, and absolutely seamless cut later. So this is another diorama that I'm working on. I can't tilt it, these models are not glued onto it very well. But actually, this is just a candle holder. And you can see what I've done is used the all-purpose filler to build up around the outside here, and really fill in around the bits and pieces that are going on in my diorama. So this is obviously something that's relatively easy to work with, dries pretty rapidly, and gives us a nice base to be able to work from. Now that we've got our rock glued down, we've got some cork that we're working on, we've filled in any gaps that we want to. The first thing that we need to consider is painting. Now, obviously you can see here, I started off by just airbrushing some general colours over the top of it. And then actually for this, I used a really simple painting technique. I used a sponge, as you can see. So let's have a quick look at it. So the sponge I use is actually this one. So I've got a large section of it, came from packing. It's quite highly textured, and on something this size, I feel like that texture is a real advantage. I have got sponges that are makeup brushes, or makeup sponges, I suppose, that I use for various things. As you can see there, it needed washing a little bit better last time I used it. These are obviously brilliant for painting the highlighting phases onto smaller models and things like that. They're much neater, and the paint goes on really nicely from these. Whereas this one, because of the roughness that you can get on the side of it, gives me really nice textures. So this is the sort of sponge that I used, just to make sure that I get that sort of variety over the top of the rock. And the rock isn't obviously the focal point of a diorama. It's not that much about the base. It's nice to have bits on the base that draw attention, but generally we just want a nice solid background that people can view and get a kind of a good idea of what's going on, where the scene is taking place, but they're going to spend their time looking at our models. So I didn't need to go for any more detail than this. I did use a brush to put on some of these little darker bits of green that you can see to kind of brings a bit more life, a bit more nature to the rock. So here's my green ink that I was using. Now obviously you can use whatever green paint you like. I love inks for this type of use because they're really highly pigmented, and they run nicely into the contours of the rock. So next up we're going to talk about how pigments can be used to achieve this really dusty look. So I have a set of pigments from Vallejo that include a range of different colours. I think this one is the one that I'm using in this situation. Also comes with black, which is quite nice for doing a sooty texture. These are available pretty much anywhere. I'll link them in the comments, in the description, as normal. But actually applying these pigments sometimes causes people a little bit of problems, so we're going to have a look at how that's done. We've got a base here, and we're going to put some pigment on it, and we're going to have a look at a couple of different ways that people use to apply these. Now, the important thing is, if you're going to be using this for a display piece, then you're less worried about how stuck down it is. If you're going to be using it for a play piece, a model that you're going to be using in battles, then you obviously don't want the dust to be constantly coming off on your fingers. So you can just use it essentially the same as a paint. So what you're going to need is some of your pigment. Just get a little bit, put that in there. All right, and you're going to need a binding agent. Now I just use airbrush thinner for this. I have loads of it around from using my airbrush anyway. I'm sure it makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to put a decent amount of this in here because I'm going to use some later on. Okay, and what you can do is just take a little bit of the airbrush thinner, a little bit of the pigment, and then just paint it on. This will dry in a kind of a matte texture. All right, and I'll show you that in a little bit of time. Nothing too crazy here. All right, you can apply it relatively thickly. This will absolutely stick down and stay permanently attached to the base, but realistically doesn't give you a great deal different to the paints that you're already using. So I don't tend to use it like this. As you can see in the little cutaway video here, what I'm actually doing is applying it just by sprinkling. So let's have a look at that. So I just get a little bit of it here. All right, I'm just going to give it a tap over my base, just sprinkle it around the place. This gives me a much more natural kind of dusting of it. All right, make sure that I go right up to the edges. Okay, not great there, but obviously I'll be going back over these again. The slight blue background colour, which from my airbrushing earlier needs to come off of here anyway. Now, that's not going to stick. It's going to come off on your fingers. All right, so we absolutely can't leave it like that. So what I do is I get some of the airbrush liquid on my brush like this, and I just flick it on. Like that. Now, this won't completely stick down your pigment. All right, you can see it going on there. All right, but what it's doing, you can see that, oh, big drop there. You can see where I'm spraying it, but obviously it's not changing the texture of the pigment at all. Now, this isn't going to stick down completely. All right, once it's dried, we'll have another look at it on the base. It's had a little bit of time to dry, so let's have a look at it. So there's our pigment. There's our airbrush thinner that we need to use. All right, as a binding agent. So let's have a look. So you can see, it's still slightly damp because it's a little bit shiny. You can see here, we've got the much more matte effect of our pigment where it's gone on. All right, looking nice there. And you can see this bit, it's bound relatively well now. All right, small amount of it fallen off where I didn't quite get my things, my complete coverage. All right, you can see that if I poke it, it'll still move around, comes off on my finger. All right, but provided I'm not going to be doing anything too ridiculous to it, then it's going to stay on there quite nicely and it's going to have the look that we intended originally. If you mix up different colours of pigments, if you apply more airbrush thinner to it, then you can get a better hold. You can see here where the darker patch, where a little bit more airbrush thinner went onto it, and it can take up a little bit more of a poke there without changing shape or without coming off quite so badly on my finger. But in terms of being able to achieve a much more kind of dusty, dry look, pigment's going to achieve that better for me than paints realistically can, which is why I'm using them in this situation. So having discussed the use of pigments and the downsides that they have, it's actually quite nice opportunity to talk about some of the other different things that I use when I'm basing models. So I'm going to use this model as an example here. Bring that in. So in here, pigments weren't going to be as practical for me. This is part of an army, so I needed to make sure that it was going to be something that was a little bit more sturdy, even though it's obviously still quite a lot going on the base. So if we have a look, if we spin it around so we can see a little bit better, have a look down here. Okay, so down here, what I've actually used to achieve that same thing is a little bit of PVA glue and a whole load of this stuff. So this is coconut fibres. Now this is coconut fibres broken down quite a long way. You can also get coconut fibres that are only broken down a little bit. So in here we've got much longer pieces. All right, and in here we've got much more powdery pieces. You can see only a tiny bit taken off of this brick. You need hardly any of it. Lasts for absolutely ages. Links to both of those will be in the description. So what can you achieve with these? Well, you can paint over the top of them. They also go on quite a nice colour anyway. So if we have a look here, you can see you can get quite a nice soil looking thing. All right, and it's applied to the top of the cork there as well. Swing it around. We've got it applied here. A little bit of paint to change the colour of it to make it look like it's underwater. Just in this section here, we've got some roots looking things. This is achieved using the nesting material, the long coconut fibres, and you can attach those. There's some there as well to give kind of the look of roots, dried smaller sticks if you wanted to. So you can achieve quite a bit of different looks with this. It's really nice as it goes on quickly. It sticks really nicely just with PVA glue, and gives you an alternative to the pigments to get that same kind of natural, dusty, dirty look. I also use some other things as well as that coconut fibre. So in this little tin, I've got some just straight sand that I've collected myself. I dry this for a little bit in the oven just to make sure that it lasts for a little bit longer. Again, PVA glue that down there. The other thing that you can do if you want to is you can collect your own sticks. So in here I have a whole load of sticks that I've collected myself just from outside. I often use roots because they have a more twisted kind of curly look. These are used on the diorama, as you can see here, but they are dried in the oven, just a low temperature so they don't burst into flames, for about 20 minutes, maybe 100 and something degrees. Maybe I'll make a short about using these. Between all those things, it gives me quite a lot of different bits and pieces that I can use to give a kind of quite a natural look to my bases. The last thing to talk about then is where all the planting comes from. So a whole range of different things attached here. Look at a couple of other examples. We've got Logan Grimnar's base here, bit of planting on there. Alright, we've got the squigs that I was just showing earlier, whole range of different planting going on there, all the way around. So how are those all achieved? So I have a whole range of different things that I use for this. So some of them are just dried leaves and plants that are available just from Amazon, mostly for things like train sets. People like to do decorations for that, so I have a couple of different levels of green options in that sort of planting. Put a link for those ones. I've picked up little bits and pieces. So this red bush you can see in the cutaway here, but this is just hobby shop material. So put that there so that you can see what it's called, but loads of different things available. Just got to kind of trawl the basis for that. And then in my little tub here, okay, I have all sorts of different things. So first of all, we've got these seeds that I've collected myself. I actually have a tub of these here, all right, in a slightly different colour. So these are seed pods from, I believe, an ash tree. I'm going to check that and refilm this bit. Next up, I've got a whole selection of different sticky grass tussocks, I guess. So loads of different colours. These are made by all sorts of companies. I know that these shorter ones, these are actually made by Army Painter. Brilliant for like a kind of a moss because they're so thin there. Lots of different grass colours, as you can see, that I've got in here available. But then I've got some other bushes as well. So I've got some unflowering plants, a little bit that looks a little bit like heather that you saw on the diorama. The variety here is important because obviously if we look at any wildlife situation, we don't have grass of one particular colour all over the place, unless it's a lawn made by man, which is obviously probably not what we're looking for our battlefield. So I've collected loads of different ones in here. I'll put a link to some of these exact ones in the description so that you can find them, because a lot of them I just pick up cheaply when I see them on the internet, but you can have a look what else I've got in here. So I've got some regular flock. I also have a tub of this over here, but I don't tend to use this very much. It's mostly going to cause us problems because it doesn't tend to go down nicely. You need a flock applicator to try and make the individual pieces look a little bit more realistic. But if you're trying to do something quick and easy, not too bad there. So that's an Army Painter one. And then just at the bottom, look, got a little bit of cork offcut and a little bit of barbed wire actually. There we go. So some different things that you can use for your base. So we'll have just a quick look at the model as it stands at the moment, and hopefully you've found something useful. that will improve the basing of your models. Thank you very much for watching.